Chapter 24. The walk proves too fatiguing to one of the party, but not to Miss Brotherton. She wanders further, and meets with an adventure, but at last returns in safety to her inn. A journey homewards, and a fact relating without ornament. And a fact related without ornament. It is but a dreary and desolate landscape which greets the eye immediately without the walls of the deep valley factory, but to all who are happy enough to feel that they are quitting those hideous walls forever, it can hardly fail to convey a sense of beauty, freshness, and freedom, sufficient to expand the heart with admiration and delight. Mary felt disposed to bound along the grassy path beside the stream with the joyless playfulness of a child, and rather than have re-entered that creaking door again, would have been tempted, like another Undine, to plunge into the water and take her chance of finding quarters less hateful beneath its rippling wave. Miss Tremlett breathed more freely, and seemed to have recovered the elastic step of youth, as she moved briskly on. But compared with what was passing in the breast of the ragged, dirty little creature that walked beside them, their feelings were most earthly cold and dull. Her small hand was still clasped in that of Miss Brotherton, who felt that the child was urging her onwards even faster than she was inclined to go, while her head upturned towards the towering heights which hemmed them in, seemed eagerly seeking an outlet from the region that her soul abhorred. "You are glad, dear Fanny, are you not, to know that you have left that frightful place?" said Mary, kindly pressing the little emaciated hand she held in hers. The child stopped short in her hurried walk, and looking up in her deliverer's face, with a doubting, anxious look that it was painful to see, murmured very softly, as if fearing to be overheard from within the walls, "Shall I never, never go back again?" "No, never, Fanny. Do you think I would be so cruel as to take you back?" said Mary. "I do not know if that is not all a dream, if it is not all a dream," replied the child. "I have dreamed that I saw green grass, and felt the air upon my face before." "Do not be afraid, Fanny. You are not dreaming now," returned Mary. "Run on, and gather that fine large stalk of foxglove. You never saw such a gay flower as that in your dreams, did you?" The little girl sprang forward, and falling upon her knees on the grass, plucked the tall flower, and pressed it to her lips and to her heart. But though this was a childish action, it was not done childishly. There was an appearance of deep feeling, and even of devotion in her look and attitude which strongly awakened Mary's interest. And when the little creature rose again, and holding the flower in one hand, slid the other once more into that of her new friend, the heart of that friend yearned towards her with newly awakened tenderness. But when she spoke to her, and endeavored to lead her into conversation, the attempt entirely failed. There are many who might have felt disappointed and chilled by this, but Mary Brotherton had truer sympathy, and as, from time to time, she felt a loving contraction of Fanny's little fingers upon her own, and sometimes caught her looking up, as if by stealth, into her face, she felt no misgiving as to the cause of her silence, but loved her the better from knowing that her heart was too full to speak. They all, and as if they moved by one common impulse, walked quickly forward as long as their road continued along the margin of the stream. But when it turned round the steep hill's base and began to mount, their pace relaxed. Mary felt that her little companion dragged on her steps with labor, and perceived that Miss Tremlett was out of breath. "Let us sit down under this ash tree, and wait for the jolly miller," said Miss Brotherton. "It cannot be very long, I think, before he overtakes us." This proposal was the more amiable because, in the first place, Mary could herself have run from the bottom of that steep hill to the top, almost without perceiving that it was any hill at all, and in the next, she so exceedingly disliked both the miller and his cart that she had consulted her own inclination. If she had consulted her own inclinations alone, she would probably have preferred retracing the whole way on foot. But very gladly was her proposal for rest accepted by both her old and young companion, and long did they remain seated under their pleasant canopy before any of them grew weary of it, till at length, after consulting her watch, Miss Brotherton expressed a doubt whether the fat miller and his lazy steed intended to overtake them at all. "Good gracious, my dear, do you really think so?" said Miss Tremlett, considerably alarmed. "Why, Mary, we shall never get back to Mrs. Prescott's without him." I hope I may be mistaken, my dear old woman, said her kind mistress, affectionately, for I fear such a walk would be too much for you. But when I remember that he is paid, and remember likewise how very little he seemed actuated by any motive save that of sordid interest, I confess that I do think it very probable he means to leave us in the lurch. Then let us walk on, Miss Mary, without saying a word more about it. The shadows are beginning to grow long already, and you shan't be kept out half the night by my laziness. Come along, little girl. With these words, Miss Tremlett raised herself from between two comfortable roots, which had made her an excellent armchair, but the little girl whom she summoned to do likewise, though she exerted herself to get on her feet, seemed hardly able to stand. My poor Fanny, you are quite knocked up, exclaimed Miss Brotherton, looking at her with great anxiety. How in the world shall we ever be able to get her on? It is only because I have not been used to walk lately, said Fanny, that it is not as we have been walking now. Our work has kept us always on our legs, and that makes them bend about so when I try to walk. But I can walk, though it hurts me, and I think it would be better to die outright in getting on rather than to rest so near the factory. So please, ma'am, I'm quite ready to go on. And again the party set off, but the difficulty with which the little Fanny got along became more obvious at every step, and it soon became evident that to get as far as Mrs. Prescott's would be impossible. The dilemma was not a pleasant one. They were still in a part of the road so little frequented that it was probable they might wait for hours without obtaining assistance from any passer-by, nor did either Miss Tremlett or Mary recollect to have seen any dwelling nearer than the high road, from which they were still at a considerable distance. The distress of the little girl was painful to witness. At the very moment when the dark cloud which had seemed to settle upon her was withdrawn, and hope gradually and with difficulty, as to eyes long unaccustomed to its light, began to reach her, at that very moment her strength failed, and a sensation like the sickness of death rendered every attempt at further exertion impossible. I must stay here, she said. It is the will of God. No, no, Fanny, said Miss Brotherton, seating herself beside her, and letting the languid little head drop upon her bosom. You have no reason to think that, while I have 1,000 to believe the contrary. It is most strange chance which has brought me here, and placed you in my hands. This was by the will of God, and I will not believe it is so chanced, only that I may see you die. You must not stay here, said Fanny feebly. Night will come presently, and you must go fast to get home. Do not be sorry for me, but, indeed, I think I am as bad as Mchl was, when he fell sick, and was carried away to die. Did you see, began Mary, eagerly, but suddenly stopped herself. She added, Not now, my poor Fanny. You must not tell me about it now. When I have got you strong and well at my own home, we will talk of poor Mchl. Try now to think how glad you will be when we have got you homeland. All our difficulties are over. But something must be done, I know, my poor child, before this can be. How had we best act in this dilemma, Miss Tremlett? Do you think you shall have courage to remain with this poor child, while I run on and endeavor to find some house where we may get assistance? Alone, Miss Mary? Replied the good woman, looking terribly alarmed. How can I let you set off in a strange wild country like this, with nobody to take care of you? Let us go together, Mary. Nothing can hurt this little girl, you know, while we are away. Think it over once more, dear Tremlett, said Mary, and then I believe you will perceive that there is more chance of your being useful to her than to me. I shall get on faster without you, good nurse, and with a lighter heart than if I took you for company, while this little creature was left with nothing but her own melancholy thoughts and childish terrors to comfort her. Then I will stay, said the poor woman, sighing heavily. But just think, Miss Mary, how I shall feel till you come back again. I will not loiter to amuse myself, replied the young mistress with a cheering smile. And now take my place, and let this poor little head rest on your shoulder. She shall lie down on that bit of level turf yonder, with her head upon my lap, said the old nurse tenderly, assisting Mary to lift her. God bless you, my dear good soul. I will be quickly back again, replied her grateful mistress. And how much more you shall show your love of me than if you insisted upon walking after me. There, she lies as nicely as if she were in a bed. If our faithless miller makes his appearance, Keep him and his cart till I come back. Tell him he shall have more gold, and he will stand waiting beside you, as gentle as a lamb." Having said these comforting words, Mary hastened onwards, and was speedily out of sight. Having reached the top of the hill, she looked anxiously round in search of a human dwelling, but nothing met her eye but barren moorland, which at some distance showed symptoms of cultivation, being enclosed in patches by low stone walls, and here and there the fragments of stunted hawthorn fence, which seemed to sustain a hungry life with difficulty. Making her way across the rude and imperfectly formed sunk fence which marked the boundary of the cart road along which they had travelled in the morning, Mary found herself on a level of some extent, but without the slightest track to direct her steps amidst the long parched grass and frequent stones which it was covered. "This will never do. I may walk here till I have completely lamed myself without a chance of meeting any living soul," thought Mary, stopping short. "I shall do better making for the high road at once." And having so decided, she turned about to retrace her steps and regain the road, but ere she reached it, a sort of hillock at a little distance caught her eye, and wishing to take advantage of its elevation for the purpose of reconnoitering, she turned aside to reach it. Her approach to it was from the east, and a dazzling sunset was in her eyes as she made her way up the rugged side of what looked like one of the tumuli which served as resting place for human bones, ere churchyards yawned for them. Greatly was she startled on reaching the top of it to perceive the western side crouching in a hollow that looked as if it had been excavated by the shelter-seeking sheep, a strange wild figure whose dress as she looked down upon it left its sex doubtful. The fragment of a hat and the remnant of a jacket were evidently intended, by their original construction, for the use of the nobler sex, while something resembling a petticoat enveloped the lower half of the figure, suggesting the probability that the masculine proportions of the attire was worn by sufferance and not by right. Mary's light step amongst the matted tufts of coarse vegetation which covered the thin soil had not been heard, and she stood looking down upon her doubtful neighbor with the advantage of being herself unseen. "There goes another day," said a voice, which, though harsh and aged, was unmistakably female, "and the silly soul has got to wait for another."